Well, good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. I'm your host, Frank Ackerman. We have just numerous topics to discuss this morning. Locally, or at least I should say statewide, of course, we know that there was the 2-day session in Albany. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Hunter Biden being the main story, a few things about Trump's trial that just recently came out in the news. So we'll be talking about as much of that as possible. As always, if you want to weigh in on the topics of the day, there's our contact information. We'd love to hear from you. Get your opinion on the plea deal that Hunter Biden has reached. We don't have all the specifics of it yet, of course, but we're going to tell you a little bit about what we do know. We're going to hear what both sides had to say about this plea, what it means when you look at it with what's currently happening with the former president. We'll dive into it as much as we possibly can. Oh man, pardon me. Never good to just cough live on the air. Let's get right to it. Okay. Hunter Biden has reached a plea deal with the feds to resolve tax issues and gun charges. Now, some people say there should have been other charges. We'll get to that. Michael Goodwin did a very good piece with the New York Post on that. The New York Post has an editorial on it that we're going to get to in a little bit. Hunter Biden has reached a deal with federal prosecutors to resolve a 5-year federal investigation. I know one of the quote-unquote talking points on this is 5 years for this outcome. Again, something we'll dive into a little bit more, just setting the scene here on Frankly Speaking. So this investigation is in the failure to pay about $1 million in federal taxes, and of course that purchase of a handgun in 2018. What had happened is he purchased a handgun, lied on the forms, which is a felony, not declaring his drug usage. I don't know if the part of this also is the fact that he just dumped the gun, threw it out in a garbage bin by a school. A lot of weird things about that part of it. Under an agreement detailed Tuesday in a filing in federal court in Delaware. Now, we heard yesterday from Alan Dershowitz, who said there's a lot of problems with the court system in Delaware. That's Alan Dershowitz. President Joe Biden's son will plead guilty to a pair of misdemeanor tax charges. Prosecutors have also charged him with possessing a firearm, while being a user of illegal drugs, which is a felony. And here's something I always find interesting, because this has happened, or at least been talked about in the past. So it's a felony. He gets in trouble for lying on the form to get a gun. But they have agreed to dismiss that charge if he completes a 2-year period of probation. So I find, and then he's not the only one that we've seen this from in the past. You'll hear about these gun convictions. Essentially, I don't know what the word would be. I'm not a lawyer, but buried, like in this situation, as long as he stays clean for 2 years. But isn't it always interesting not to say anything about Hunter Biden's past or what his future will look like? I do find it interesting when they lessen gun charges, and then we hear so much about we need stricter gun laws. Something in my mind doesn't add up there. Why is it a pick or choose scenario? But CNN put together, and again, it is with CNN, and we're going to talk about it after the break, what to know about the charges, giving us a little bit more information. It is from CNN, so it's not, I want to say complete, but it is something that we learn a little bit more about what we're dealing with here. We're going to hear from what the president had to say about this. We'll also be talking about, of course, the former president, what he had to say, some of the politicians out there and their reactions to it when we come back. But stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio on beautiful Market Street in Corning. And I didn't mention at the beginning of the show, we had a last-minute cancellation. So you and I get to spend the whole hour together, and that is why it shouldn't be a one-sided conversation. I want to hear from you. And I do promise we're not just going to spend the whole time on Hunter Biden. This is just the breaking news of the day. And I'm not sure how much. You're seeing some coverage now from outlets that really never covered it in the first place. You are seeing some coverage of it now. But not maybe as in depth or from the various avenues that we'll be presenting it here on the program. But CNN did put together, what to know about this case. I'm sure there's much more than what they have included in this specific piece. But one thing that I know is a talking point in the media from some in the Democrat Party has been, well, this is a an attorney that led the probe is a Republican. And also Donald Trump appointee. So you're going to hear that a lot in the media these next few days, or for as long as they let this continue in the news cycle. Many are presenting it as well as now done and over with. Of course, once we get the final decision, some of the numbers that come in, some of the penalties, then the story is, in their mind, over. And that's how Biden's camp is presenting it. And you can understand why they present it that way. The gun charge, again, going back to what I said in the first segment, is what kind of fascinates me the most from a group, whether it be the media or from Biden and his party, is always very strict on pushing gun control, always very much about gun control. And then something like this happens and the rules change a little bit. It's not as strict on gun control. They said the firearm charge will be subject to a pre-trial diversion agreement. Now, according to the Department of Justice website, this is a discretionary option available to U.S. attorneys to divert certain offenders from traditional criminal justice processing into alternative systems of supervision and services. So almost like a probation, right? Instead of cracking the books, and for a felony. But we'll continue. I'm just giving you some of the who, what, when, where, and why here. So what are the max penalties? And I know a lot of people on the more conservative outlets have been saying, well, it's a two-tier justice system. You're going to hear that a lot. You're going to hear the talking point of it's a slap on the wrist. Well, gun charges for someone addicted to drugs can carry up to 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Each of the tax charges could be punishable by up to a year in prison and either a $100,000 fine or twice the gain or loss from the offense. Details of the exact plea agreement will be forthcoming, but the government will recommend probation for Biden, meaning no jail time, but a judge does have to sign off on that agreement. So no jail time most likely as of right now. Now, the exact figure is not clear how much Biden will owe in taxes, and something that the mainstream media has been kind of reluctant to talk about is how much money he made. You're talking about at least $1.5 million a year in taxable income for 2017 and 2018, and he owed over $100,000 each of those years. I know this gets a little wonky. He had that. I think he had help paying that back. But if you look at, and I think it's Michael Goodwin, but it may be the Post editorial board, that talks about how much the Biden family has been making. And that's been something that a lot of people have demanded be looked into. But again, I'm just trying to set the scene. I don't want to run too late. How much exactly was Hunter Biden making during those years and from whom? And this again from CNN. Again, it's not entirely clear. We do know that during those years, he was making as much as $50,000 per month, $50,000 per month, sitting on one board for the Ukrainian energy company Burisma. We know that. This agreement does not disclose his total income or his entire tax bill. And then they say, will this end the public's interest or Republicans' interest in Hunter Biden and his finances? They say no, far from it. Republicans have pointed to financial records, and this is one of the points I want to make, that show Hunter and other Biden family members were paid more than $10 million from foreign sources alone between 2015 and 2017. So we'll get a little more in depth on what some people had to say about this. And again, most important person I can hear from on this is you. So text or call this morning, and I'll try to get to some of your comments at the end of the program. So right now we need to take a short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. Before we move on with our discussion on Hunter Biden's pleading guilty to these charges, I did want to mention tomorrow on the program we'll be talking with the author of Overture of Hope, Isabel Vincent. She'll be joining us. That book is a kind of an amazing story about two sisters who saved Europe's Jewish opera stars from the Third Reich. I think it's going to be an interesting interview, and that book is available actually yesterday on paperback. Okay. So the President Biden, said, "I'm very proud of my son." In response to this, the White House counsel's office said that the President and First Lady Jill Biden love their son and support him as he continues to rebuild his life. Now, the former President, Donald Trump, is kind of tough with his posts on truth because there's normally so many that I'm sure I'll miss some. But I did want to mention, I guess, what would be the biggest statement, as is normally the case, mostly in all caps. The Hunter Joe Biden settlement is a massive cover-up and full-scale election interference scam, the likes of which have never been seen in our country before. A traffic ticket. And Joe is all cleaned up and ready to go into the 2024 presidential election. And this as crooked DOJ, state, and city prosecutors, Marxists and communists all, hit me from all sides. And angels with bull. Make America great again. So that is the former president, Donald Trump. Maybe if we have time, and again, this will not be our only focus on the program this morning, but we may have some comments from some other politicians out there. I will say, if it's a Republican, the common language used is a slap on the wrist, two-tier justice system. But Julian Zelzer from CNN questions, and if you remember, we had a great piece last week about the in defense of whataboutism. If you're not familiar with whataboutism, it's the idea of, well, what about this? So, what about Hunter? Why is Trump getting charged? What about Hunter? So Julian Zelzer from CNN, who's not a fan of Trump, and that's an understatement, said, what about Hunter has a different ring now? The news strikes a blow to one of the key Republican responses to the federal indictment of former President Trump. Whataboutism. Now, many in the media and many on the left laugh at whataboutism, even though they use it themselves. It's human nature. That was a piece we had last week, that whataboutism is really how the justice system is formed, with precedent and the like. But he's basically saying what I mentioned at the beginning of the show is the mindset of many, especially Biden supporters and Biden and his family, his campaign, that this is over. This is done. Nothing more to see here. That is Julian Zelzer's opinion here. The GOP has argued that the Justice Department has two standards for justice, and that it holds Republicans, particularly Trump, President Joe Biden's main political rival, to a different standard than it does Democrats. To prove their point, they have cited Hunter Biden's alleged misconduct and claimed the Justice Department has not been clear or has not been nearly as aggressive in its pursuit of justice regarding him. And of course, I mean, you can still look at that at face value. You still had 5 years for these charges. You know that the IRS had that investigative team that was recently fired. So there's a lot here. And I think what Julian Zelzer is doing is throwing down the initial thought so it'll all go away, in that, nope, see, it is done. It is, and they keep talking about whataboutism, but look, something happened here. I think that's a weak argument for what you're seeing from these charges, but that will be something the media is going to continue to present, because he even says, but that is clearly not true. The Justice Department investigated and reached a plea deal with the president's son, a decision that will surely be politically explosive for President Biden as he heads into the 2024 election cycle. By who? Explosive by who? Oh, of course, the president's going to bring it up. The other Republican candidates for president will probably bring it up. But will the media be covering this? No. The media hasn't really been covering this from day one. Hence, the censorship of the laptop after New York Post's investigation into it. That was more censored, of course, on social media. But again, this was not to be talked about before 2020, that's for sure. And David Wise, the leading U.S. attorney and Trump appointee on the case, has said the investigation is ongoing. So there's more to come. That's more to get Republicans off their back. I mean, ongoing. Do you ever hear anything that's ongoing that something comes to fruition from? The White House said the president hasn't had any interference in the probe. Despite this, leading Republicans were quick to criticize the Justice Department's plea deals. And here's some of the ones that I wanted to mention quote-wise that we'll get from Julian Zelzer's article, trying to defend his position that this is over, that there is not a two-tier justice system. I'm just presenting you what he has to say, and again, I would love to hear from you. Former Ambassador Nikki Haley, who also is running for president, said the deal only raises further questions about the double standard of justice. Meanwhile, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy told reporters, if you are the president's leading political opponent, the DOJ tries to literally put you in jail and give you prison time. If you are the president's son, you get a sweetheart deal. And Trump compared it to a traffic ticket. So sweetheart deal, common language. So finally, I'm not going to go through all of Julian Zelzer's piece as we get ready to take another break. But he said, with this plea deal, we have evidence that the Justice Department's attention is less focused on election outcomes and more focused on the endurance of our legal system against the immense pressure it has been facing. So if you look at those charges, is that an endurance? Is that a fight for endurance? Again, you be the judge. I know that depending on what outlet you go, they're saying MAGA meltdown over Hunter's plea deal. MAGA meltdown, of course, kind of showing you're not coming in this with a neutral opinion. Again, not going to be our only topic for the morning. So stay with us. We've got a little bit more on this, and then we're going to move along. So this is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV Big Fox, and we'll be right back. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. So again, some of the talking points, a MAGA meltdown over Hunter's plea deal. There was definitely some people outraged, it looks like. I mean, Don Jr. Clearly would not be happy. He said, if you are a Republican, Biden's DOJ will throw the book at you and try to put you in prison for 100 years. But if you happen to have the right last name like Hunter, they will protect you and treat you with kid gloves. We are no longer a nation with equal justice under the law, but rather something more akin to a third world banana republic, where the law exists to protect the ruling class while targeting the opposition. So that was Donald Trump Jr. Elise Stefanik from here in New York State, of course. I can listen to how biased this is from the Daily Beast, but a one-time moderate who's become a full-blown Trump acolyte, groused about the two-tier justice system that gave only a slap on the wrist to the president's son, and she promised retribution from the GOP. Quote, House Republicans will not rest until this full illegal corruption of the Biden crime family is exposed. Joe Biden must and will be held accountable. But as I said earlier, CNN, Julian Zelzer's at least saying, well, now this is essentially over. ABC, another way of trying to present this again, and this is nothing new. I don't think I'm saying anything too shocking. The media hasn't been very forthcoming with this from the beginning. They did a piece this morning, booze, drugs, a pet snake, and foreign dealings. Families can cause headaches for a White House. President Joe Biden's son, Hunter, is by no means a first presidential relative whose personal troubles have caused headaches for a White House. There's going to be various ways to spin it, and as I mentioned earlier, we do have some on the conservative side saying, this from the New York Post editorial board, how does it take 5 years to come up with this? That is a fair question. As we've long feared, the 5-year Hunter Biden investigation is wrapping in a plea deal over charges the Justice Department simply couldn't avoid bringing. Yeah, they did have to bring something. I would agree with that point. They had to. The Justice Department couldn't completely ignore this, even though it had been 5 years, and try to do their best. Because the public record established Hunter's guilt on them long ago. Yeah, with the gun charge, I believe Hunter brought it up in his own autobiography. It reeks because if this were truly all Hunter is guilty of, it wouldn't have taken this long or be shrouded in so much mystery. And that's one of the big problems with this. Is this just a couple of charges when there was so much more? Because he admitted to tax avoidance counts in the past. He admitted about the gun scenario in his autobiography. But other obvious and apparent crimes didn't get charged, according to New York Post editorial board. He never registered as a foreign agent, even as his laptop and other evidence shows he was lobbying. He was blatantly peddling influence, the only possible explanation for the millions he scored in Ukraine and China. And it's because of, obviously the connection with his last name. Nor do prosecutors seem to have followed up on a clear indication of money laundering. Money moved through a vast network of accounts. There's many things that we've seen from the evidence from the laptop that was not brought up on these charges. On the money laundering, especially, we know the IRS axed the expert team that had been digging into Hunter's vast web of accounts. Now, this was not reported a lot on the media. We talked about it here at the time, just very quickly. But yeah, they had an expert team looking into this. And in the last minute, just recently, relatively recently, they got rid of the whole team. Were they getting too close, the New York Post editorial board asked. Now, keep in mind, the reason I mentioned the New York Post editorial board so much in this, the New York Post was one that originally exposed a laptop and was censored for it on social media. They were called very bad names by the mainstream media, questioning whether or not they faked the whole thing, these type of things. How could their replacements have possibly finished the work? After they got rid of that team of experts with the IRS, how could their replacements have possibly finished the work in bare weeks? So prosecutors could, in good confidence, opt against charges. Yeah, what happened those few weeks that now we don't need those charges? And what an end this is. I mean, it is an end. Hunter gets off easy, even by the low standards set by the charges. Misdemeanor for the taxes. The only felony he could have faced over the gun is waived away as long as he straightens up and flies right. Again, the investigation began back in 2018, and we know the feds soon had enough evidence to convict on the charges, just recently brought, perhaps before and surely soon after the 2020 election. And we are supposed to believe they held off so long because they were looking into more consequential crimes, only to suddenly decide that they couldn't prove anything else, even though they had that top IRS team indicates there's consequential crime. And then they fire that team, and now they can't prove anything else. Now, if you recall, Attorney General Merrick Garland refused to name an independent counsel to take this case. If a special prosecutor of clear integrity had offered this plea deal now, it'd still stink, but might be something the public could swallow. But as things stand, the only possible conclusion is the justice is corrupt. So that's the other side. We mentioned this morning what CNN and others had to say. That's from the New York Post. Also, and I'm not going to get into the whole thing, how we doing on time here? Well, we're doing okay. Michael Goodman, also from the New York Post. Again, you've got to remember how entrenched they've been in this case because of the laptop from day one, that I'm sure this stings a little bit. Because if you've seen what's in that laptop, I mean, obviously these charges were a few of many. He said to express disappointment in the results of the Hunter probe is to admit you ever believed it was actual and honest in the first place. Shame on you if you did, he said. For the other side of the coin, see the FBI's tracking of parents. This is a good point. Think about this. I know they tell us we can't use whataboutism. But look at the charges. And again, I go back to the fact that, again, they talk about gun control, the need for stricter gun control, and then this is the charges against Biden, Hunter Biden, that it's a felony, but it'll go away after 2 years of behaving yourself. And then what Michael Goodman's saying is look at the other side of the coin. See how the FBI is tracking parents who dared to criticize progressive school boards and agents who are willing to carry out an armed visit to the home of an anti-abortion protester. Or traditional Catholics also were singled out for this undercover surveillance. And he goes into quite in depth on this, and I just don't have the time. We don't have the time to go through all of it. But I did thought it was a good point. He said he starts doing the whataboutism, And again, I'm not opposed to whataboutism. I think it's essentially the basis of our justice system, which is precedent, right? But what he's saying is, with President Trump, he said, I'm not arguing that Trump is innocent in the classified document case. It is to argue that Hunter Biden is getting favored treatment despite making many millions of dollars in a worldwide influence peddling scheme, as the known facts make clear and as whistleblowers swear. And that goes back to, I think, nullifying Julian Zelzer's point, suggesting that it's all equal. That clearly the Department of Justice is working for just justice. I don't think too many will see that unless they have kind of a Biden rose-colored glasses on. The laptop doesn't lie, says Michael Goodwin. Besides, no honest investigation of anyone takes 5 years and then comes to a halt with charges that amount to low-hanging fruit. That's a great point. 5 years for those charges. What took so long for those charges? If this is all there is to Biden's scams, and he was willing to plead guilty to these charges, the case could have been settled long, long ago. Yeah, why would it take so long again? Okay, so that was probably just about enough of Hunter Biden for this morning. I think we did a good job of trying to give you the perspective of both sides, and that's why I'd like to have you weigh in. Before I came back from break, I did receive a comment saying, I guess, this is from a viewer, and thank you to anybody who contacts us. I guess, like it or not, even if he was convicted of all these charges, we must remember who is his father, who, by the way, has the power to make all these charges go away by pardoning him of all charges. That's a good point. Would he do that? Some would instantly laugh at me and say, of course he would, Frank. During an election year? I don't know. Maybe. All right, so contact me. We're going to talk a little bit about New York issues when we come back, and then we may circle back around, but I think we're doing just about fine on time to get through a few other things. There is a couple things here about the presidential race. We'll see. But I want to get to a couple New York issues, and I will make sure to try to get to any of your comments when we come back. So please contact me. All right, let's take a short break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, we are moving quick, so stay right there. Okay, we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and we're broadcasting live from the Heselson studio on Marcus Street in Corning. Walk by, wave, we'll add you to the counter. So we know that there's this extra 2 days in Albany, which is kind of weird. I know on Friday we're talking with Assemblyman Chris Friend. Hopefully he can shine some light on exactly what happened those 2 days, but also what we're dealing with. And I found out something today that we really haven't talked about that much. I'm not sure why. Let me put it up on the screen here, and that's why I wanted to bring it to your attention. We've talked so much about bail reform. We've talked about the issue of public safety. I got them out of order, but that still works. Let me give you the facts of it first, and then we'll go back to the more loaded one. Maybe I won't be able to do that. Never mind. Let me find the loaded one. Not loaded, but just gives you a little bit more information about what exactly we're dealing with. Because, again, when it comes to public safety, Democrats in Albany have made it very clear that their idea, kind of a lot of virtue signaling and kind of social justice, is a little bit different than perhaps what our law enforcement community believe. A lot of the people that are dealing with crimes in their neighborhoods, something that they've been affected by, maybe not what they agree with either. So the New York Assembly Chamber is seen as let me jump ahead here. I'm sorry. I don't want to give you all of that background information. New York State's legislative assault on the law abiding continues. The Assembly is headed back for this short session. It's a special session. This does not happen very often. In part to pass a Senate-cleared bill to make it vastly easier for crooks to get their convictions overturned. That's including in cases where a prior vacate effort got denied on the merits and where the defendant simply chose not to try for an overturn at the time of conviction. It even allows for possible repeated vacate efforts, though the facts haven't changed at all. So you can continue to do it. Nothing's changed, but you keep jamming up the court system by these vacate efforts. The pro-crime move comes wrapped in the usual Orwellian language, writes the Post editorial board. I guess the Post is getting a lot of focus this morning. It's called the Challenging Wrongful Convictions Act. Now, the law already holds numerous paths to getting a bad conviction vacated. You hear about them all the time, such as on grounds of police or prosecutorial misconduct, an incompetent defense attorney, or the belated emergence of new evidence, like DNA, things like that. So this is the cover for yet another move in the progressives' drive to dismantle every keystone of our criminal justice system in favor of junk justice, is what they call it. Consider, by limiting qualified immunity, leftists have hamstrung cops' ability to do their jobs, hanging the threats of a lawsuit at every move. Statewide, we've been paralyzed with the prosecutors and the burdensome, pointless discovery requirements, which we've talked about a lot on this program. They've largely demolished judges' ability, this is the Democrats in Albany, to set bail, even for truly dangerous defendants. Via less is more, they ensure that vicious thugs on parole can break the law and still stay out of jail. And unfortunately, we've seen it, we've experienced it for the last how many years. That's why, again, I know I've said it numerous times, that's why Governor Hochul tried minuscule changes to bail reform, because she wanted, for a public relations effort, wanted to make it look like she cared about public safety, because Lee Zeldin did so good against her, did such a great job in such a heavy Democrat state, because he ran on public safety. And Democrats don't recognize that is a serious, well, they probably do recognize, but they don't care. That's what happens when you have supermajority in Albany. Of course, they all but abolish, this is something we've talked about in the past, abolish criminal penalties for anyone under 18, leading to a tragic rise in teen gun violence. With this month's Clean Slate Act, which we mentioned earlier, which wipes away criminal records, now they want to give lawbreakers the right to seek early release on the flimsiest of pretexts, ending any finality to our legal system. So just basically the case is ongoing, constantly ongoing. And safety, and it'll also hurt the safety among the citizens. Plus, these proceedings will burn up precious court time, a court that's already overburdened, which is something we've talked about in the past as well. And prosecutorial resources, again, which is a struggle at this time too. In a system already badly overburdened. Why not hold off on this stuff until crime's back down to where it was before the reforms? Yeah, if you think about it, it's hard to believe, but yes, with these reforms, quote unquote reforms, crime has skyrocketed. And that's what makes the names that they give these certain reforms really ironic, maybe for lack of a better term. It's looking ever less like progressives just don't care about feeding a rise in crime, and more like that's the point, to feed the rise in crime. And that goes back to the talking point that we've had here, that we've said numerous times. I know Talking Point has a little bit of a bias towards it, but that we are encouraging criminals in the state and tying the hands of law enforcement. This is just another example, essentially a continuing court case. And they call it, and I like that the Post calls it Orwellian, because it is very Orwellian. Kind of change the meaning of the name. Oh, wow, I'm running late. Look at this name. It's not what it actually does, but it sounds good. Who wants to be against the Wrongful Convictions Act, right? So prosecutors are asking for Governor Hochul to veto this. We'll talk about it when we come back from break, so stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. A couple of quick comments to read from viewers. This is actually a good comment. It's in reference to the Hunter Biden case and what former President Trump is going through, and what a lot of people see as a two-tier justice system. And the reason I say this is a good comment is because this is very similar to what the president's been saying. He even mentions it in what he's saying. But it's also going to be something that's brought up a lot by Trump, by his supporters. So keep this in mind. But I think I think it encompasses the thoughts by many, which is beware if the MAGA president can be treated as he is being treated. As he said, they will come after you. And to tie that in with what this person is saying, if you look at just the article itself, again from the Daily Beast, but saying MAGA meltdown. You know, I think if you are, I'll put it this way, and I've said it before in the past, and I'll say it again, if you're not a Trump supporter, if you think he should be thrown in jail, I think be careful on what you get giddy over or what you celebrate. Because these are the kind of things when you see a Julian Zelzer piece about Hunter Biden being like, see, it's over. See, everything's equal in the country. When you see this type of stuff, that's going to go directly in line with what the former president's talking points have been. It's kind of the idea of the deep state and the swamp. And if you recall, former Congressman Joe Semplinsky was on the program a couple weeks ago, and I thought he had a very good point. You know, there's a lot of people out there that don't really care for Trump, may not like Trump, but really hate the deep state even more. So just keep that in mind. And I think that viewer put in exactly what Trump and his supporters will be saying. And then jumping back to the topic we're going to talk about right now, which is the Wrongful Convictions Act. One of the viewers said, hard to care for public safety for Hochul because she only cares for herself. I think there's a point in the fact that when it comes to the bail reform changes she made, that was very much just a PR move. She knew it had no teeth to it, really wasn't going to change much of anything. No one was really that thrilled by it. Why do you think the supermajority actually allowed it to go through? Because there's nothing seriously there. But she could go around and say, look, I care about public safety. No, then let's do something about public safety. And that goes back into the piece that I wanted to mention originally before we got into kind of the more loaded article from the New York Post. And this is from Zach Williams. And he says that New York prosecutors say that this act would upend the justice system and demand the Hochul vetoes. Prosecutors are demanding that Governor Hochul veto controversial legislation allowing criminals to overturn their convictions by proving their, quote, innocence after Assembly Democrats approved the idea on Tuesday. Under this bill, no conviction or plea would ever be final. Think about that. That's J. Anthony Jordan, president of the District Attorneys Association. Under the bill, every plea agreement would be subject to challenge years later, and this is a very, very important point, when witnesses and evidence would be difficult to obtain. So essentially wait a couple years, and maybe everything will have changed, and you'll be able to get this quote-unquote overturned. The Challenging Wrongful Conviction Act, which passed the state Senate earlier this month, would loosen state laws to make it easier to overturn convictions without DNA evidence. Assembly Minority Leader William Barclay said, how many times are Democrats going to tip the scales of justice in favor of convicted criminals? Victims and law enforcement continue to be an afterthought in Albany. It is amazing, you know, because again, going back to Lee Zeldin's race, the public is obviously concerned about their safety, is concerned about the rise in crime, if they feel safe in their neighborhoods. And it seems like every opportunity Albany gets, it's another bill that I think common sense tells us, well, that seems to be headed more towards the criminal than it does to law enforcement or even just public safety in general. You know, we had the Clean Slate Act just last week. Now we have the Wrongful Conviction Act, go to bail reform. The list goes on and on and on. And there's no denying, well, I shouldn't say there's no denying, because with the manipulation of polling and things like that, some in Albany have been able to say, well, never mind what you're seeing with your eyes, never mind what the media is reporting, never mind this rise in crime and this huge threat on public safety. Everything's fine. Just trust us in Albany. So it is fascinating to see the coverage and the spin on this, but time and time again, man, I'm running late. Time and time again, we have another bill that just seems to go against common sense on how to rein in the crime on our streets. Let's take a break. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We have to take a short break in just a second, but I wanted to mention this because we've been a little bit doom and gloom there for a little while there on Albany, that last couple segments. So this is a study coming out from the Firefighters Association of the State of New York, and I know Assemblyman Phil Palmisano and I have talked about this in the past. Do you know how much volunteer firefighters save for New York? Remember this next time you see a volunteer firefighter to thank them. Taxpayers save $4.7 billion a year. $4.7 billion a year thanks to our volunteer firefighters. That's why we'll always try to highlight when they have those open house weekends. And if you're ever interested in joining, you can always contact me and I'll find a way to get you in touch with who you need so that you can become a member. So thank you for all that you do. And now we'll take another short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. All right, wrapping things up here on Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Thank you to everybody who reached out and contacted us, weighing in on all the we covered a lot today. If you're just joining us, we covered a lot, and you missed out on a lot if you're just joining us. There's an editorial from the Times-Union. I'm just going to wrap up things quickly. The Times-Union did a piece about Hochul's very bad bet, they call it. And I thought it was a good point. I don't know if you followed this a lot, but it is simply not a good idea, they said, for Governor Hochul's husband to continue to work as a senior executive with Delaware North, a company with extensive businesses before the state. While we are keenly aware that spouses of elected officials deserve to have their own careers, there comes a point where the level of recusal required by the elected spouse ought to prompt the private sector spouse to look for another job. And you can find this at the Times-Union. I don't know if you followed that at all, but the governor having to recuse herself because of her husband. One last thing, a story that we bring up a lot, and I'm not sure if you saw that this morning, but China is negotiating with Havana about joint military training facility in Cuba. Now, this comes after what was supposed to be a successful conversation with Blinken and the Chinese president. Now, we're aware that the Chinese president did say something to the extent, I'm glad we could come up with some of these agreements. We never found out what those agreements were. So what kind of, this is flexing is what this is. Now, they do say, according to a senior U.S. official, Beijing and Havana are discussing what kind of training would take place at the facility and what the leadership structure would look like. Biden administration officials have brought up these talks with their counterparts in Beijing and Havana. It's unclear, however, how far along China and Cuba are in their chats about the prospect for a deal. We are out of time for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you to everybody who joined us tomorrow on the program. Isabel Vincent, the author of Overtures of Hope. So, have a great day, everyone. We'll be back tomorrow morning, bright and early, starting at 7 a.m. I look forward to it. We'll talk to you then. Hi, I'm Frank Acom. Thanks for checking out our YouTube page. We'll be uploading each edition of Frankly Speaking 1 week after the original air date. So, let me remind you to watch the live version of Frankly Speaking, weekday mornings starting at 7, only on WYDC TV, Big Fox.